Not only did J.R.R. Tolkien call Dante Alighieri petty in his 1967 interview with the Daily Telegraph magazine, but he also mentioned that Dante was full of malice and spite, and that, simply put, he didn't like him. Considering Dante's legacy and impact on Western literature and Catholicism with his Divine Comedy, this may come as a surprise to most. Many parallels have even been drawn between The Lord of the Rings and the Divine Comedy, with a number of scholars claiming that Tolkien drew inspiration from the Italian poet. Specifically, some have connected Dante's noble castle from Inferno with Minas Tirith itself, its 7 walls and 7 gates, and its position as a beacon, a light against the darkness that consumes its surroundings. Even the feelings that emanate from its inhabitants may remind us of the pagans destined to reside in limbo. Others have drawn parallels between the language used by the two men, such as in Tolkien's description of the darkness of Mirkwood and Dante's opening lines of Inferno. Finally, and this is most definitely the result of comparing any two works by authors sharing a religious understanding, but you may draw parallels between Frodo's journey to Mount Doom and its moral development, and that of the pilgrim Dante traversing hell, purgatory, and heaven. You may find similarities in a specific place, having an inherent moral identity and reality, such as Mordor and the Shire or Valinor, hell and heaven. Now that we have gained a basic understanding of some potential parallels, let us go back to that infamous 1967 interview. Infamous as Tolkien felt the need to reply to his interviewers, Charlotte and Dennis Plimmer, in order to apologize for certain things, while clarifying others, so as to make sure that the final draft of their article was accurate to his beliefs. This is letter 294, which you may have heard mentions of before, as Tolkien notably apologized for sometimes speaking too fast and unintelligibly, or walking around on account of his arthritis, and even lighting a pipe during the interview, something he explained calmed his nerves as he was understandably anxious. Eventually, he makes reference to the part of the interview concerning Dante. In the original interview, he had reportedly said the following: "Dante doesn't attract me. He's full of spite and malice. I don't care for his petty relations with petty people in petty cities." After reading the draft of the interview, Tolkien walked back on this obviously harsh criticism of the Italian poet, and clarified his position by replying the following: "My reference to Dante was outrageous. I do not seriously dream of being measured against Dante, a supreme poet. At one time Lewis and I used to read him to one another. I was for a while a member of the Oxford Dante Society, I think at the proposal of Lewis, who overestimated greatly my scholarship in Dante or Italian generally. It remains true that I found the pettiness that I spoke of a sad blemish in places." Essentially, Tolkien claims to have exaggerated, but that his primary sentiment regarding the occasional pettiness of the poet within the Divine Comedy was true. This is generally consistent with J.R.R. Tolkien, as he was noted by those who knew him that the professor would occasionally use exaggerated language to make a point, and he would sometimes regret it. This was one of those times, which is why he made sure to correct his mistake before these opinions were published. The question is, why did he say these things in the first place, and what can we surmise that Tolkien truly thought about Dante and why? At first glance, especially for those that have read the Divine Comedy in its entirety, or perhaps have watched an analysis of it, the answer may be rather simple. In his original quote, Tolkien makes no mention of Dante's literary skills, or of the quality of the text and the value contained within. The Divine Comedy is one of the most important works of the Middle Ages, and perhaps the most important of the modern Italian language, a language that Tolkien himself was personally interested in. Tolkien was known to have heavily disliked allegory, and especially religious allegory, and at the end of the day, what is the Divine Comedy if not religious allegory? To this angle, however, I personally disagree. For Tolkien, his problem with allegory was what he called the domination of the author on the reader. Essentially, the reader was not allowed any interpretation but that of the author. This bothered Tolkien especially when it came to a religious context, and was the primary issue he had with, for example, the Chronicles of Narnia and their depiction of Aslan as Jesus Christ. The Divine Comedy is different. While it may exist as an allegory for the soul's path through the afterlife, from a sinful existence to God's grace, from Inferno through Purgatorio, and ultimately to Paradiso, it exists on a different plane. Its purpose is to explore these three stages of the afterlife, and it does precisely that, outright. It's not some elaborate allegory that hides these three stages behind something else. It is simply an open exploration of them. I think Tolkien's true issue with Dante is how the poet used his exploration of heaven and hell in order to take the opportunity and portray his real-life enemies negatively. Throughout Inferno, we see Dante put his foes from the real world suffering in hell, while describing their punishments and expressing his personal joy and sense of justice in his description. Some notable examples include his longtime enemy, Filippo Argenti, who is described as being torn apart by the damned within the river Styx. Alberigo, who was alive when the work was written, is put into hell prematurely while his body is possessed by demons in the real world. And mentions to Pope Boniface VIII in hell and other indirect criticisms of the rival papal establishment also make a notable appearance. Generally, some of his punishments include eternal imprisonment in fiery coffins, pits with snakes, forced starvations, burning feet, being frozen in ice or boiled in water, and much, much more. Admittedly, some of the figures he mentions may have even deserved their punishments, at least in the context of their time, as understood by medieval society, but they are all nonetheless real people from Dante's time, with the exception of the occasional ancient pagan. Dante, in Tolkien's original view, maliciously used something as serious as God's divine judgment for his own personal earthly vendettas, something he did extensively throughout the work. The Divine Comedy is deeply connected to the political life of Florence during that time, and you can begin to understand precisely why Tolkien used the words malice and spite, as well as petty relations with petty people in petty cities. The importance and value of the work cannot be overstated, but the fact remains that Dante all too often stops his exploration of the afterlife to deal with his own personal pettiness, something that I don't think many people ultimately disagree with. Obviously, the way Tolkien originally phrased these opinions came out as too strong, and without the nuisance that we just discussed, especially in an article that covered his entire life and couldn't be dedicated to just his opinions on Dante. Therefore, for the final draft, Tolkien had to balance his views and explain that he did in fact value Dante and the Divine Comedy quite a bit, even participating in a Dante society. And as part of this revision, he made sure to mention the heart of his feelings regarding Dante's pettiness, but in a much softer tone. Ultimately, the answer is yes. Tolkien did call Dante petty, and if you ask for my personal opinion, I think his original statement did represent his honest and unfiltered views regarding Dante's work, regardless of his later correction. However, as he did revise his statement, this is entirely up to interpretation and every person's individual understanding of J.R.R. Tolkien. A massive thank you to my channel members, and thank you very much for watching.